All right, we're going to continue in our journey through Proverbs. We finished looking at verses 1 through 4, and now we are going to finally, hopefully, finish that intro in verses 5 through 7. So I think now would be a good time to go ahead and reread all of them, make sure we still have our head in the context of this passage so that we can ask the right questions and continue our conversation. So read along with me. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance, to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Okay. So we're at a new blank page, and we're going to work this out. So if we remember, the last verse we just looked at was talking about the youth and the simple. Okay, so it's pretty interesting that in verse 5, we find ourselves transitioning to the wise. Let the wise hear and increase in learning. And the one who understands, this is another subject here, the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. Okay, so we have a lot of verbs here. So that verse 5 and 6 was a full sentence. So as I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, okay, let's deal with that first. Because that last verse, verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. It's kind of sitting there by itself. It's kind of a different thought from what came before it, and it feels very... it feels like it's summarizing, right? Like it's coming to the conclusion. So we'll come to that in a minute. So when we return to verse 5, let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. Okay, we have a lot of verbs, so the wise are hearing and increasing in learning, and the one who understands is obtaining guidance. And when we look to verse 6, to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. Okay, so we have our subject here. It's the wise, the ones who understand, and they are hearing, increasing, and obtaining guidance. Okay? And then this to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. That is for what purpose, right? They're doing this for what purpose? The wise are hearing and increasing in learning. The one who understands is obtaining guidance in order to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. And what are they trying to understand? They're trying to understand the words of the wise and their riddles. Okay, so this is kind of strange, right? When we compare it to what came before. We thought we were just focused on people who didn't have wisdom. We were focused on the youth, those who were lacking a more general audience. But now Solomon is saying, no. This isn't just for those people, quote unquote. This is even for the wise. This is even for the one who understands. And so let's focus in on this verse 5. Let the wise hear and the one who understands. Why do the wise and the one who understands need these things? And this is hearing, learning, and guidance. Why would they need these things? They're already wise, right? Well, this would seem to apply, right, that wisdom is on a spectrum. You're not just wise or not wise, but this is a process of character formation, is what it would seem to imply from what we looked at the beginning, right? You're continually gaining knowledge, wrestling with it, receiving, being changed, and pouring back out. And that whole process doesn't seem to have an endpoint, right? Especially because Solomon, if we return to that first verse and we remember his credibility, right? He's the wisest man. He's the wisest man in the world, right? The wisest man who's ever going to live. And so this guy is saying, hey, even those who can be considered wise are still on their way to being wiser. They have to continue to increase in learning. They have to continue to obtain guidance. So wisdom is more like a spectrum. Right? We have sort of the simple, those without the youth, we have the wise, and we have the more wise, right? And actually, theoretically, right, this just sort of continues in ad infinitum because God is wisdom. So let the wise hear and increase in learning, right? So hearing is that first verb. They have to continue to listen, right? Because where are they going to get this knowledge from if they don't keep their ears open? They have to be able to hear and then increase, okay? And the one who understands obtain guidance. Now, the obtaining guidance especially seems to imply that potential for progress is still an external thing. Like even wise people need guidance as they move forward. So these proverbs are going to be great, even if you are wise, because they're going to continue to be giving you the guidance you need to increase, to keep going along that sort of infinite expanse of the spectrum to get even more wise. Because the more wise you are, right, the more changed you're going to be, the more you're going to be able to give to other people. And what is all this for? Okay, to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. Now, this is fascinating. So he's saying the wise, those people who already understand, need help. They have to increase in their learning. They have to keep their ears open, right, and listen up to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. Okay. So, right, a few questions here. Why don't they understand? If they're wise, why don't they understand? And then I would ask myself, okay, a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. Well, why do they speak in riddles and in sayings? What's the deal with that? Right? What's up with that? Why are we speaking in proverbs and riddles and sayings? Why aren't we just saying exactly what we mean? Why aren't we doing that? Because, we might have to come back to that question, but let's first answer, right? Why don't they understand? Well, they don't understand, right? Perhaps because wisdom is landing on this spectrum, right? If this riddle is beyond the wisdom of the person over here, well, then they need guidance in order to move forward, in order to gain the understanding, to have the character development, the change, the knowledge, the understanding, in order to parse out that riddle. And you might imagine this kind of like a puzzle, right? Because if we're thinking about a spectrum of wisdom, right, where you kind of start and you slowly kind of gain this understanding and it changes you and it changes your character, what if it's kind of like a puzzle, a Rubik's Cube, and there's formulas for how to solve a Rubik's Cube if you didn't know that. You would have to be just extraordinarily intelligent to solve a Rubik's Cube with no help, right? No knowledge of any of the algorithms, no knowledge of any of the no studying prior to it. And so there are these many different ways to solve it, but it all happens in steps. You solve one layer, and then you solve another layer, and then you add the corners, and then you solve the top, and you rearrange these pieces, right? And so it has all these steps. And if you didn't understand how you got the first step, you'll always end up, with like one side solved, and you can't ever solve any other side without breaking up that one side if you've ever tried to solve a Rubik's Cube. And maybe wisdom is something like that, right? Where you might understand the first level, right? And maybe you can get all of these, right, to be one color. But then you can't move it anymore, right? You're stuck. You have to have guidance, and someone has to realize, oh, actually, you're not supposed to get it like that. You're supposed to arrange it like this. And then that will enable you to take a new step, right? And so the person who knows how to get that one side, if they hold it and they turn it towards you, you might think, oh, well, they know how to solve a Rubik's Cube, except all the other sides are mixed up. They just didn't show you that. So they have some level of wisdom, right? But they don't have all the wisdom they need to solve it. But here's where I think it gets really, really cool. Because imagine, right? Imagine if you could solve it. Okay, and you have all the levels, and you can solve the whole puzzle of wisdom. Okay? But we said it goes on to infinity. Well, imagine if wisdom was like a puzzle that when you solve it, it creates a new puzzle with a different kind of solution. Now, for some of us, that might sound like a nightmare, right? I mean, if I go from simple to being wise, can't I just be wise? Why do I have to keep learning? Why do I have to keep becoming more than what I already am if I'm wise, if I have understanding? Well, it's because there's always a new puzzle, right? And so you could easily be discouraged by that, right? So option one is discouragement of this idea. That the idea that even the wise have to continue to gain understanding and learn and receive guidance, this could be very disheartening. And in that discouragement, you could think, oh, I have to keep going. That's terrible. I don't want to keep going, right? I want to be done. Right? I want to be over. I want to have what I need. I want to be able to solve that. I want to be able to mix up that Rubik's Cube and solve it exactly the same way over and over and over and over and over and over again. And that is actually what you do with Rubik's Cube, right? And so that maybe that's not a bad thing, but it would be discouraging to think that once you have it solved, you still have to continue to solve it. But I think this is an encouragement. And, maybe it's my personality that lets me see that a little easier than maybe someone else could. But I think it's an encouragement because this means, if I become wise and I have understanding, my adventure isn't over yet. There's always a new adventure. Because when I solve a puzzle, that creates a new exciting puzzle. I mean, if you could create that in real life, I'm giving someone a brilliant business idea here. If you could create a puzzle that when you solve it, it creates a new puzzle with a different kind of solution, it would be amazing. Well, at least for some of us, it would be amazing. But it would always be a new adventure. And I think when you become wise, I think maybe it's easier to see it like this, right? Because I have a feeling that the distance, right, that this distance is relatively short in the grand scheme of things. That this distance is relatively long, and that this distance is unbelievable, right? Just like beyond what we can comprehend. And so once you reach here, you're like, oh, wow, I've made it. Except you're looking out into the distance and thinking, oh, I have a long way to go. But then even if you kind of have the stamina and the fortitude and the perseverance to make it here, once you're here, it's like, whoa, I made it to here. And you're looking out on the horizon and there's even more you didn't see. There's so much farther to go than you've even come. And you could look at that and think, oh my gosh, I'm never going to make it. Or you could think, wow, I'm never going to run out of opportunity. I'm never going to run out of the puzzle that makes my life, gives my life purpose, that makes it exciting, that makes it interesting. And I think God is like that. I think He's an adventurous God. He likes to provide us opportunities to step forward into faith, to continue to work things out and progress. And that's why even the wise can continue to become more wise, can continue to be changed in themselves and to give out to others. I think this is just a beautiful extension of a process. And I think I kind of ended up answering it, right? Why do they speak in riddles? I think it's for this reason, right? Is that there are layers to wisdom. If I was, you could probably, do this like an onion too. You peel back one layer and there's another layer. You peel back one layer and there's another layer. And you shouldn't just, you couldn't just, rip apart the whole thing. You could, but you would miss out on actually understanding how to get there. And I bet there's a better image to think about that than an onion, because you can't just cut an onion in half. But the layers of wisdom, it's like, they're locked. You can't get to that next layer until you've understood how to peel back that first layer. And only then does the new puzzle present itself, does the new issue present itself. It's like, you don't know what you don't know. And you have to take those little steps to gather that knowledge to realize, oh, there is more here. There is more depth here I didn't realize, right? The closer you get to a thing that seems really small on the horizon, the closer you get, the bigger you realize it was. And that's something like a wise person's riddles, those sayings of the wise. There's always, a first sense, an initial sense, but then there's ever deeper nuance. If we're thinking about riddles, oh dear. If we're thinking about riddles, not sure why it did that, sorry. It's like an iceberg. That's what it is, right? It's a riddle iceberg. You have the tip of the iceberg, and everyone can see the tip of the iceberg. And some icebergs, maybe the tip is even really big, right? It's like, oh, that's like a little mountain. That's pretty impressive. There's a lot going on there. But then, under the surface of the waters, we've all seen pictures like this. It's gigantic. It's beyond. It's far beyond anything you could have imagined. It's multifaceted. It's multi-layered. And the words of the wise, right? You begin here. You begin looking at the surface. But as you become more wise, as you gain greater insight, you begin to see beneath the surface of the water and see the rest of that iceberg, right? You begin to solve the next puzzle and the next puzzle and the next puzzle. And you find out, right, that there are continual puzzles. Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's so exciting. So let's see. We answered our 2 questions. There might be more questions to ask, but I think this verse is going to speak into the conversation we're having right now really, really well. When we go back to the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Okay. So I think this will apply to this question. Well, why do they? Why do they speak like this? Well, because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And only fools despise wisdom and instruction, okay? So we're going to have to figure this out a little bit. So what is the fear of the Lord? Why? How is it related to knowledge? And how is it related to the beginning of knowledge? And then we're going to have to work through this idea of the fool. Who is this? Why do they despise wisdom and instruction? Right? So how does the fool contrast with the wise person? Okay. So let's start working through that. What is the fear of the Lord? Well, when we think about the word fear, right, we're thinking afraid. We're afraid of the Lord. And, that's maybe a part of it. But proper fear, right, is an appropriate kind of awe and respect. And it's beyond respect, right? Because the Lord, it would almost be foolish not to be afraid of him, right? Because the Lord has power over us. He can snap his fingers and boom, we're gone, right? But he doesn't. But it's proper for us to look at that and say, oh, wow. It's a proper respect. It's a fearful respect. I think awe is probably a good synonym for this. We should have awe at the power of the Lord. Because fear is the proper response to our place before the Lord, right? If we fear the Lord, we are recognizing two things. If we fear the Lord, we recognize two things. Who he is and who we are. And particularly, what he is capable of and what we are capable of, right? So when we fear the Lord, we recognize that he has greater power than us, that he is more powerful than us, and that we are at his mercy. And when we recognize that in him, we recognize it ourselves that we are less powerful, right? That we cannot control the Lord. This is a recognition that he is greater and we are lesser. And that's not bad. That's just how it is. That's the proper hierarchy. And so this fear of the Lord does a lot of work for the person, right, who's beginning this journey of knowledge. Because if you don't know where you are, where you stand in the world, then how will you know where to go? How will you know which way is up if you don't even know what direction you're facing, if you don't even know where you are on the ladder of power? But not just of power, but of being, right? Of existence, of worth, and any number of other things. So this fear of the Lord helps us understand him, helps us to understand us, and when we understand those two things, right, it actually helps us understand a bonus third thing. It helps us understand our relationship to him. Right? So we know he's greater than us. We know we're lesser than him. And that's how it's supposed to be. We understand that this is our relationship to the Lord. He is creator. We are created. He has the power. We are at his mercy. And these are not the same states of being. And when we recognize that, I think we gain the key trait in wisdom. Right? Because, and okay, I say it's the key trait, and I'm making a claim here without walking through the questions. But, so I'll hold on to it. But let's go back. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Okay? So this fear of the Lord, it's the key. Okay? The fear of the Lord is the key to this whole thing. It unlocks the beginning of knowledge. It opens the door. Okay? And knowledge is that very first thing that we need to know wisdom and instruction, right? We don't have it, and then we do. Then we know. Now suddenly we have all kinds of opportunities to either wrestle with it and reject it, or to not wrestle with it at all, right? To reject it out of hand. Something that would probably be foolish to do, but we have that option. But you don't have that option if you don't know. And the fear of the Lord is the key to that option. It's the key to the possibility of really knowing and then thus really understanding. And so this is the beginning, and it's the starting line. And so when we talk about the fear of the Lord as the beginning of this whole process, right? This is probably the most important trait. And so when we think, okay, well, what exactly is this trait, right? We see now that, well, it's a certain kind of awe, it's a certain kind of respect, it's a recognition of who we are and who God is. And what all of this probably ought to instill in us is humility. It seems like humility is the key. That the fear of the Lord and humility are maybe even the same thing. Because humility is a recognition of who you are and who you are before the Lord. And you're not devaluing yourself in humility, but you're placing yourself where you belong as a servant, right? As a recognition of being lower. And what is incredible is that in any other hierarchy in the world, placing yourself as lower would basically guarantee that you will be put upon, right? That you will be debasing yourself. But Christ tells us this in the New Testament: when we lower ourselves, we will be raised up. Go sit down at the farthest end of the table so that the master of the feast can bring you up to sit beside him. And this is what the fear of the Lord is doing. This, when you fear the Lord, this is the beginning of knowledge. Now you can know. This is the key. Humility. Haha. Good rhyme. Okay. And what's really cool is understanding this fear of the Lord is how we unlock what a fool is. Who's the fool? The one who doesn't fear the Lord. Simple. He doesn't recognize who God is. He doesn't recognize who he is. He doesn't understand that relationship. The fool despises wisdom and instruction because why? Because he doesn't think he needs it. Okay, how do I know that? How did I figure that out? Well, it's because when we go back to this verse, right, we recognize, okay, this fool's being contrasted with someone who fears the Lord. Okay, so he doesn't fear the Lord. So he doesn't have humility. So he doesn't understand these things. Okay, and he despises wisdom and instruction. Why? Because Solomon just spent all this time proving to us that understanding, that wisdom, that guidance is for those who need it. It's for the simple. They don't have wisdom. It's for the youth. They don't have discretion. They need these things. The wise recognize they're on a spectrum. They have a lot more to go. They have more that they need. But the fool despises all of those things that the wise man can give him, all of those things that God can give him. Why? Because he doesn't think he needs them. This is the lot of the fool. Right? This is the contrast, the fundamental contrast that Solomon is making. It adds another section, and I don't have much room, but this adds another section to our spectrum. The fool. And he's going infinitely in that other direction. And this is the choice he offers us. Right? I mean, this is pretty incredible. If we go back, especially, we're thinking, Solomon offers this incredible process that we can go through, that we can participate in, that we can receive from, be changed by, and then pour out value into the world because of, and change people's lives because of. And he sets all of that up in the first 6 verses, in the first line of the 7th. And then in that very last line of the introduction, he says, yeah, you can do all of that. I put all of this out there for you, or you cannot do that. And you can despise wisdom and instruction. We have a choice to make. And in fact, it's not just one choice. It's many choices. And that's right. That's why this process is not just one snap of the fingers. It's not just an automatic change. It's a process. And it's a process that can get derailed. But this is the possibility of the Proverbs. That no matter who you are, whether you're simple or you're wise, right? you can become more wise. You can pursue an infinite adventure because wisdom has that many layers, an infinite number of layers that can change and grow you and bring vibrancy to your life. Right? It's an iceberg. The riddles are an iceberg, and you can spend your whole life discovering what's underneath. But it all starts with humility. Humility is the key. The fear of the Lord is the key to it all. It doesn't start truly. The process to becoming wise doesn't start truly until you fear the Lord, because we have to understand who we are before God, that He's greater than us, that we are lesser than Him, and that is our relationship. That is our proper relationship. And when we recognize that, then we can begin this process of change, of positive, beautiful change. But we have a choice. Our lives don't have to go this way. We can be the fool. It's an option, but it's not one I want to take. And if you don't want to take it either, you'll continue the journey of Proverbs with me in our next section. Hope to see you in the next video.